Hello everyone, I welcome you to the UNC Summer Jazz Workshop. Before we begin the week, I wanted to provide a little tutorial on how the jazz chord symbols work, how the notation looks and what it all means, and also show you a little bit how it looks on the keyboard as well. I think it will help everyone, even the students in the journalism and jazz history section who may or may not read music, just to have a sense of what's going on when jazz musicians are improvising and looking at chord symbols and playing off the chord symbols. So I wanted to provide a quick tutorial on that before we begin. I ask that everyone please watch this where possible before the week begins. Okay, there's 5 main chord qualities that I'd like to cover today, and then we'll look at a few others as well. First of all, we should understand that we're talking about tertian harmony, which means chords that are stacked up in thirds. Looking at the piano here, what happens is we number the scale steps. You go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Now we never really say 12. We just call it the fifth. 12, 13, we do use that one, and we never say 14 really. But we will use these, and we're going to talk about this here in a moment. And we'll stack notes in what we call thirds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And these tones that are above the seventh, this is what we call the chord tones. 1, 3, 5, 7. And then when we get above the octave, the 8, so the 9, and 11 and 13 are what we call extensions. Now I'll explain this tone right here on major in just one moment here. We'll play that actually on major. Okay, so our extensions are 9, 11, and 13. So go ahead and start trying to memorize these. Don't get stressed if you're not able to grasp this all. I just want to give an overview of how the chords work. So you'll see here on my slides here that major can be notated with just a letter, that means major, or MAJ. And so a triad would be a 3-note chord, like right what is listed there. And then we begin to stack thirds on top of that. So C major 7 can be notated with an MA, it could be C MA7 or MAJ7. And the triangle actually means the seventh. A lot of people don't realize that it means the seventh. They think it's just like the triad. But it's C major 7. Okay? And from there, we're going to go here and stack our extensions on top. The ninth can be notated with a triangle 9 or the MA 9, or it could say MAJ 9. Any of that works. So, okay, so you should actually sing the tones. 1, 3, 5, 7, 9. It helps to get it into your ears. Okay, then the next extension we can add would be the 11. Now let me show you this. A regular 11 on major. Does that sound good to you? Hopefully you're saying no. And the problem is this. It's really this 4 and the 3 together, which were considered a dissonance that was not desirable in this type of harmony. Okay, so when 11 is in there on major, we raise it, and that tone is the sharp 11 or sharp 4. Incidentally, the chord symbols don't tell us how to invert the chords or how high or low to play the notes. So this is also the sharp 4 or sharp 11. 1, 2, 3, 4. And that sharp 4 or sharp 11 is what we call the Lydian tone. So go ahead and start trying to memorize that. A lot of tunes that end major. In the hotel ballroom, the singer will go, and often sing that Lydian tone. Okay? Okay, now we've gone major 9, sharp 11, and then the highest extension you can go is the 13. If you go another third beyond that, what do you get? You're playing the octave. So in this type of harmony, you can have basically 7 possible pitches at once. Now when you get into ultra dominance, Sometimes you can add more notes, really get up to like 9 possible notes at once. But that's another thing altogether. So for most of the chords, you have 7 notes at once. And that's why it's a very rich harmony, as opposed to like when rock and roll came in and they went back to 3-note chords. Like, I think I explained that in some of the other videos as well. But with jazz, you have all these rich chords, and often the composers would target the upper extensions and alterations and put melody notes up there so it would be really rich. Okay, so that's the C major 13. That's the 13th on top there, okay? So again, your extensions are 9, sharp 11, and 13 on major. Okay, now this next chord symbol here you see on the page is a C major 6. That was popular in the 40s. A lot of melodies would end on the root, and if you have the major 7, you run into that same issue you had here with major 3rd and 4. It's that minor 9th relationship, and the melodies would be like and it's not a great sound, so often the composers would make it a 6 chord. Okay, and then the next chord symbol there is a 6-9 chord, and you'll see that there's 2 ways that can be notated, and these 3 are an exception in the way they're notated. Let's talk about that now, actually. Okay, a C2. These 3 chord symbols all have numbers right after the letter. Now, in most cases, that having the number right after the letter will signify a dominant chord, which is like this. We'll talk about that next. But in this case, these are 3 exceptions where the number right after the letter still means major. This is a C2 chord, which is 1, 2, and 5. It's popular in the 80s. And so on and so on. It can be pretty hip if you add some change bass to it. Swap out the bass. We'll talk about that later. Okay, so that's your 2 chord. That's major. And a C6, these 2 are synonymous. It's the exact same thing. Just different ways of saying the same thing. And this means the same as that as well. Okay, now I won't talk too much about scales for today's overview. But these are scales that could be played and improvised over the top of these chords. And don't get overwhelmed with this. We'll be talking about this the rest of the week. You can either play major or Lydian. There are reasons why you might choose one or the other, which we can talk about later in the week. But those are 2 suitable choices of scales that you could play over the top of those chords. The next family is the dominant family, indicated by the number coming right after the letter. Dominant means you, instead of major 7, you lower the 7. Okay? And then, like the other chords that we just did, you can add extensions above that. Here we add the 9, C dominant 7 with the 9. So this is the way you say it is C9, or this is C7. Okay. This would be a C13. Okay. Now there's a kind of a rule that I could have mentioned on the other slide, that, and there's always theory textbook rules, and then there's bandstand knowledge, and they're not always one and the same. Theory textbook rules would say if you have a 13, you play all the extensions leading up to it with the sharp 11 in there. Now that's not always going to be the best choice on the bandstand, because if the soloist is playing through this Mixolydian scale, which has a natural 4, that sharp 11 is going to clash, and your soloist might want to punch you in the nose if you play that as a pianist or guitarist. So all with good taste and all in the right time and place. Okay, so here would be with the sharp 11 then there, the C13. I think it's wise in your chord symbol writing to go ahead and put C13 parentheses sharp 11 if you want that in there. Okay, and looking at these scales down below, there's this thing called the Mixolydian, which is like major, but it lowers the 7. And That's why it coincides really nicely with these chords. There's this jazz scale called the bebop scale, which has both the flat 7 and natural 7, and there's all sorts of little patterns that can be played over that. David Baker bebop, or stuff like that. It's kind of nice, adds a little chromasis. And then the blues scale, probably most of you are familiar with that. You've certainly heard it. That can be used at certain times too, and can work over the entire blues form, and in other cases as well. We'll talk about that later. Okay, now we get to the cousin family of the dominants. These are dominants as well, but they're altered. And dominant chords can be altered at the level of the 9. They can either go up, be raised 9, or flat 9, or it could be sharp 5 or flat 5. Sometimes that flat 5 could be notated as a sharp 11. Again, that sharp 11 doesn't mean it's played higher than the flat 5. This could be flat 5 up here. One subtle distinction is the flat 5 would technically say, again, theory textbook, that you don't play the natural 5. That would be the sharp 11, and without it would be like a flat 5. Okay? So here's C7 sharp 11 and C7 flat 5, and then here is a C7 sharp 5, and then now we add the 9. Let me go back to the flat 5, the C7 sharp flat 5. This would be a scale that works nicely with that. And again, what was that sharp 4 called? Oh yeah, it was the Lydian. Okay, and dominant means flat 7. Wait, that makes a lot of sense. Lydian dominant, so you got a sharp 11 or sharp 4 and a flat 7. So this scale works nicely over that. We'll talk about where that comes from later on in the week. In some of the theory, in the advanced theory class we will. Okay, and for this chord, the sharp 5 and natural 9, the scale that works with is this chord scale called whole tone. It's all whole steps. Can be kind of fun. Debussy liked that scale a lot. Okay. Now we go to the altered 9. So if we first start with the C7 flat 9, the next chord symbol has a 13th in there as well. Okay, and then the next one is dominant sharp 9. Now I always like this one because growing up I watched that old 60s Batman show. You know, I can't remember the actor's name, but it was Batman. And the theme song was this. Is the melody always is a sharp 9. It's a blues form with a sharp 9 each time. So I can hear a sharp 9 chord and instantaneously know what it is because of Batman. I can thank Batman for that. Okay, now also to add to that, 13 with a sharp 9 that could work. The scale that works with this is this thing called the half-diminished scale. Some of the classes we might talk about this. We will talk about this in the advanced class, that's right. So we're going to go root, half step, half step, whole, and it just alternates like that. And you can see that the scale has both the flat 9, sharp 9, and the flat 5 or sharp 11, and the natural 5 and 13. So it works well with dominant flat 9 or the dominant sharp 9. Now, one that you can use on the flat 9 or sharp 9, but not with the 13, is this thing called fifth mode harmonic minor. That sounds scary, but don't let it scare you. So you just think of that C root and you think down a fifth, and then you play that harmonic minor scale. So 1, 2, flat 3, 4, 5, flat 6, major 7, and that gives you those notes. And you can start it from the C or wherever you want for that matter. But that one will not work with these that have the 13th in it because that gives you the A natural. Okay? Let's move forward. Now we get to the fully altered dominants. Fully altered is when both the 5 is either lowered or raised, and the 9 is also altered. And you could do any combination of these. Okay, so there's 4 of these. Let's start in order. So here, looking at this chord symbol right here, you've got C7, flat 5, and flat 9. Now we raise both of them, sharp 5, sharp 9. The next one is lowered 5, sharp 9. The next one, the chord symbol bank in Finale only has this one as far as I could find. It could have said sharp 5, flat 9. Here it says flat 13. It's the same pitch. And there is a subtle distinction between those two, but we won't worry about that now. Okay. So again, in order. Okay. Now you might say, well, those sound pretty similar. Exactly. The scale that works with it is this thing called the diminished whole tone. It starts like the diminished scale. Root, half, whole, half. Then all whole steps after that. And it's whole tone after that. This scale has 3 names to my knowledge. It's also called Superlocrian and also the altered scale. It's all the same scale. So the altered scale or the diminished whole tone works over all those 4 chords, the fully altered. Moving on. Okay, next we come to the minor family. Minor has not only a flat 7, but a lowered 3rd, like that. Okay? Minors can be notated with like an MIN, just an M. That's why I don't like capital M for major. Some people write that, and it's published out there in a bunch of books, even some theory books. But arrangers will know it's not a good idea to use capital M for major because sometimes the fonts between capital M and lowercase m are so hard to distinguish, you could get some wrong chords played. I have to say, I detest the capital M because I want to sound good as a pianist, and I got my pride and my ego. You know, when I'm sight reading, I want to sound like I'm nailing it, and sometimes it's hard to tell between those. So just remember, a lowercase m for minor is appropriate, okay? And minus sign, that's all. This all means the same thing. C minor 7, C minus 7, that all means the same thing. And again, like before, we now add extensions. So there's your 9. Now check out regular 11 here. How does that sound? It's actually really, really nice and warm because you don't have that half step thing. It's now a major 9th, which is a warmer interval. Okay, and then we got C major 13. So you can just play that. So regular 11 works great on minor, just not on dominant or major. You got to raise it there. But on minor, that regular 11's great. Okay. Next, you see a C minor 6. Notice that's an A natural there, not an A flat. And then the 6-9. Okay. This 6 comes from the Dorian mode. And you can see here the Aeolian 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 would be flat. That's our natural minor. But Dorian has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 is natural. Okay? So don't worry too much if this feels overwhelming. Just keep in mind basically the chord symbols, we're now on minor, which has a lowered 3rd and a lowered 7th. And then these extensions, 9, 11, and 13. Okay? Let's keep moving on. Now we get to the hybrids. I have to be careful with some of my silly jokes. My family teases me because I like to watch the Spanish channel so that I can keep my Spanish up. I lived in Mexico for a couple of years and I've played in a lot of Latin bands. I love trying to speak Spanish. But you hear on these like TV novelas, like she'll say, Francisco, I'm leaving you. And then the ending chord right before the commercial will be, Francisco, I don't love you anymore. That's what I think of when I hear this. So C minor, And then this has a major 7. These are the hybrids, I call it. Minor triad, but instead of flat 7, major 7. Okay? And then the 9, and then you could add extensions up on there as well. Okay? The scale that works here is the harmonic minor scale. It works really great. Flat 6, major 7, which coincides with that. Okay? So as you can see there, any of those notations work well for it. Okay? Let's move on. Half diminished, now we go back to the minor, let's say. Half diminished will lower the 5. So you've got root, flat 3, flat 5, and flat 7. And there's 2 notations for that. There's the, this one spells out what the intervallic content is, so that one's a little more thorough. It says minor 7, 1, 3, 1, flat 3, flat 7, with a flat 5, and then this one is a shorthand, a diminished sign with a slash through it, meaning half diminished. There are different scales that work over this. Locrian would be a common one. Comes from the 7th mode of major. Don't worry if you don't know that now, it's okay. Just keep track of these chords, basically, and how they move. There's also one that works from the harmonic minor, from the 2nd position, and then also the 6th mode of ascending melodic minor, which we'll talk about another time. Okay, lastly we get to diminished here, and you just lower, that's dominant 7, low minor 7 down another half step. So you got root, flat 3, flat 5, and not just flat 7 but diminished 7. And the scale that works here is whole step, whole half diminished. So you go root, whole, half, whole, half, whole. Okay. Yeah, let's leave that for now. There's some cool, really cool stuff that comes out of that scale and this chord. Then there's some others out there too. I mean, there's a number of different types of chords. Here's an example of what we call a major sharp 5. It's been used in more modern jazz. The scale that would work there is this thing called Lydian augmented. Your sharp 4 or Lydian tone, and then augmented means raised 5. Okay. Another chord that's popular in a lot of jazz tunes is the sus chord, C7 sus. That could also be played as a 9, and you could have the 13th in there too, usually right there. And the scale that works on that is Mixolydian, even though it has the natural 3rd in there. So what sus does is instead of the 3rd, you're going to play the 4th. Suspended 4th is what that means. Okay. And then finally, you know, in the 1970s, jazz artists were trying to find different types of chord symbols that were kind of could go to different places and have different things. So they started doing what classical composers had been doing. You know, Stravinsky with his Rite of Spring, you know, in 1913 was doing this. Polychords, an E major chord. He spelled it as an F flat major and played it in this register and an E flat over it, combining 2 different normal chords and putting them together, and you get new sounds. That was called like polychords. In some cases even polytonality, but then and Debussy was doing some of that as well. Here we find what we call slash chords, and I chose to use this 2 chord. And what the slash means is you can simply change out the bass, and the slash, what's on the right side, is actually your bass note, which is played in the left hand. So C2 chord over E flat, over E, over F, over F sharp. You can see how it can take just a normal chord and really Okay, so that's a lot of stuff. But going back here, if we just look at the main chords, just remember you've got major, major 7, you got dominant 7, it lowers this, and remember it's notated with the number right after the letter. You've got minor, and then you got various altereds, we'll leave that for now. Minor 7, you lower the 3rd. You've got half diminished, you lower the 5th. Then you got fully diminished. And then you have a bunch of extensions that can be played over the top of those. So don't get overwhelmed with that. This is a theory overview. You'll have access to this video throughout the rest of the summer. And we'll reinforce these concepts throughout the week in the different theory classes. Okay, thanks so much, and we'll see you in the classes.